Thanks for coming. Just real quickly, a little bit about myself. So this is my second company, Bitmark, hopefully my last company. My first company, we made an open source mobile phone. This was before Android, before iPhone. It was a really good idea, but we didn't make it. So Bitmark, we're a venture-backed company. I raised money from Silicon Valley and then also from China. We're based in both places. I'm going to talk first about property rights. You're probably wondering, what does property rights have to do with health? So we'll get there. Property rights, they came from land a few hundred years ago. So there was a time, it's kind of hard to believe, where only kings, queens, and churches could own things, could own land. And the story of how people got to own land and later how people got to own ideas is a story of decentralization. And each time ownership was decentralized, huge amounts of wealth was unlocked. So the agricultural revolution, industrial revolution, these both really were powered through the decentralization of ownership. Patents, for example, were originally monopolies that a queen would grant to her friends. So maybe if you were her good friend, you could get a monopoly over selling sugar. And when people were able to get these rights, everything changed. So that's what we're trying to do. That's the purpose of why I started this company, is to first define digital property, what is it? And then to be able to defend it in a way that connects code and law together, because just because your code says something doesn't mean it's legal, and vice versa. And finally, how do you make it economically divisible? How do you let people to actually utilize this asset and turn it into the next major asset? We started by building our system on top of Bitcoin and realized quite quickly that money and property are just fundamentally different. Money is always the same, you can interchange it. Property is the exact opposite. So you can't really build these property systems on top of monetary systems. They just don't really work well. They fail in these kind of edge cases. So we ended up building our own blockchain. And I want to give you just a quick state of the Bitmark blockchain. It's a public blockchain. We are Hyperledger members, but we're probably one of the kind of the rare ones that works on the public stuff. It's in production use since 2016. People are making money with it. We're primarily focused in two use cases, music and health. Health is the majority of this talk. Let me cover music just really quick. We work with the largest music streaming service in Asia. They took songs and they said, hey, artists and labels, if you want to get paid a lot faster for your music, put the song rights on the Bitmark blockchain such that the fractionalization of who owns what, who gets paid for what is clear. And then we partnered with one of the largest private banks over in China to make those royalty payments. And instead of taking 4 to 6 months, which is what it took before, and losing 10%, the artists get their money faster. It can be instant, but it's about 2 weeks because the banks are slow. And everybody's really happy. So that's been in production for about a year. Well over 300 million songs have been streamed. So it's a really kind of a cool success case there. What's going on that's different than most of the other blockchains is that we're just storing records. There's not a Turing-complete scripting language. Property rights is best seen as a bundle of things that lawyers call a title. So you have a title to your home, a title to your car, and that title is what gives you the rights to utilize that asset. So we basically mapped that framework onto a digital system, so a digital titling system. That's what Bitmark does. So you have some piece of data, a digital asset, the metadata around it, the socially and economically useful attributes of that, and then a title issued against that data. And then the title is chained together. So the notion of chain of title, provenance, is what our blockchain preserves. All right. I want to get through all that quick so we have time for the really cool stuff. So I want to share a case study. So about 1.5 years ago, Pfizer came to us and they said, we run these clinical trials, and I had no idea these numbers. They still surprise me to this day. And the clinical trial, the average one is about $75 million US, and they recruit something on the order of 3,000 patients. So if you're an internet company that develops anything and you said your cost of acquiring a customer is $25,000, you'd be like, this is insane. but that's what the pharmaceutical companies pay for this stuff. And a lot of that is overhead. And so they said, could we swap out the lawyers and the accountants and all of the custody and all of this sort of paperwork with the Bitmark blockchain and be able to record the consent as it moves between the parties? So in a typical model, you actually have three parties. You have a patient, you have the study, and then you have a matching system. Now this is usually companies. There's many companies that compete to do this. And the matching is almost like a matchmaker in dating, in that they know profiles, they know who needs what, where they are. And then you have all these lawyers that have to manage how these things work, custody the data. So because I only have like 7 minutes, what I'm going to show is like a sped up version of what an actual pilot would look like, where we take 100 studies and we take 1,000 patients and run them through all of these different permutations to figure out who goes where. And all of this stuff is actually recorded on the blockchain. Hold on, let me see here. Oh, okay. So you can wow, it's gonna be impossible to read. Okay, so it does look pretty good, but I will post these slides and you can see it. It's really hard to even read this, but what's happening is the patients have a pseudonymous identifier, essentially a public key. The studies are identified. You want to know who you're sharing your data with. And so each activity goes like this. The patient passes a profile of their data to the matchmaker. The matchmaker then looks across the blockchain to figure out which studies are advertising they need patients. And then if there's a probable match, the study sends a consent record to the patient, which then runs a computation on the data to make sure the match is really good, and then transfers the property title to the study to access the data. Okay, so that's what's going on here. All of it's being recorded in the blockchain. This was a pilot, but it was run on a fully operational public blockchain, the Bitmark blockchain. The benefits. So we presented this to the senior management around 4 months ago, and they were just thrilled by this. And so there's a number of benefits that are obvious. Everybody in this room already believes in this sort of stuff. You know, you can audit what's going on. You can't go back and change. All of that stuff's kind of, you know, everybody knows that. Specific to pharma, and why I think this is such a killer app for pharma, is that most people don't know this, but everybody's genomic properties are different. So when you make a drug and your clinical trial pool of patients is too small, or if it's not diverse enough, when you actually roll the drug out to the world, it just doesn't work with a lot of people. And so this idea of being able to crowdsource data for these studies and do it in a way that's global and do it in a way that's cheap enough so it doesn't cost us $75 million for 3,000 people, this could change everything with the way drugs are developed. And so I think that's actually one of the most interesting benefits, is the ability to increase the diversity of these pools. Now, that's the benefit to pharma. What's the benefit to us people? Benefit to us people is that because the way the system works, everything is audited, everything is tracked, you have much higher degrees of transparency into what's going on as a patient. And then even when the study finishes, they actually give you back your data that's been analyzed and processed as part of the study as a digital property. And this digital property is something that's really valuable to research. And so we did partnerships after this with UC Berkeley, the School of Public Health, Stanford, with the Medical Center, where people can now donate their these study results to help advance science. So I think that's a really interesting kind of use case that was counterintuitive, that these clinical trials are not just for the pharmas, they're also for you, and to show how these things kind of link together. All right, about 2 minutes left. I want to share where we're going. So we finished this pilot. Now we're operating on the next stage of this pilot, and one of the really interesting aspects, or surprising things to me at least, is that, and I should preface, this is very US focused, but we also run this stuff in a number of countries in Asia. In the US, and especially Europe with GDPR, people have phenomenal rights to their data. But the problem is that unless you're in the same hospital your entire life with the same doctor, you don't have that data. So most of these pilots that we were running, they made the assumption that a patient actually has their data, which they don't. And so we developed some software, and all this is open source now, that allows a person to control their health. So they can aggregate records from both sensor stuff, watches, footsteps, things the device has, and of course the medical side. And so this data is then pooled into what we think of almost like a vault that runs locally on the phone. And the rights to each of the data that's in that vault are recorded on our public blockchain. Not the data, of course, data stays local, it stays private, never goes in the cloud. The rights to utilize that data are what's in the cloud. And then these trials and studies come across as offers, right? So you opt in. Do you want to participate in this study? And what it's going to do is it's going to run a computation locally on your phone in a privacy-preserving way. And then those results then go back to the institution that wanted those. So this is what we're rolling out in a couple of months. We have a first set of partners that really believe this could be a new stack for how these type of interactions with health data happen. Again, the same bank that was involved with the royalty payments, they also have a huge, massive life insurance company. They want to be one of the participants that are requesting data. And so those are the different partners that we have lined up for these new type of studies that we're going to be running in the coming year. Okay, so when you're able to substitute lawyers and auditors, I don't mean to bag on lawyers, my dad's a lawyer. When you're able to substitute these with computer science, you have far higher security and you have far lower costs. And so we think that this idea of a global pool of data that has consent to use it baked into it, and the ability to say, hey, I want to submit an offer to this pool to utilize this data, and I'm willing to pay for that, and to do this in a way that's publicly auditable, and where the accounting is clear, everybody can kind of see what's going on there. We think this is going to be a really, really killer application. So thank you for your time. I'm going to be around for the next couple of days. If you want to find me, please, I love to talk about this stuff. If you prefer, I'm on WeChat, Signal, those are my two favorite messaging apps, or the email's down there. But definitely I'm faster on the messaging apps. Okay, thank you.